I'm going to keep it a beanbag with you. Welcome to Derry. Episode 3 gave us a couple scary scenes, but way more information about the characters. They were definitely able to weave in heavy amounts of symbolism per usual, but the threads are really starting to connect right alongside the story, and we're going to talk about all of it. But before we do that, I appreciate all of you for watching, and if you're new to Real Enigmas and Theories, welcome. This video will contain spoilers for episode 3 of It, Welcome to Derry. So without further ado, let's cook. One thing I've been talking about real heavy during my coverage of this show is Howerin's role in the grand scheme of things. I noticed that in episode 2, Howerin mentions that he knows a place where to get some moonshine. Now, the character that we know for sure that can shine is bringing up moonshine. Then the episode starts off with a song about the moonshining. They start us off with a 1908 flashback and a recording from 1908 with Harry McDonough and Elise Stevenson. This was also the same year as the Derry circus tragedy. No Pennywise, but we do see a clown with similar face markings. We get a lot of symbolism with the turtles and clowns, and it even looks like you can see the deadlights on the Dog Boy poster way in the back. We also have the corner perspective of the cube with this Y shape. And this shows up in the It lore a few times, and I've talked about it in my first It video. But we'll talk about those shining connections, the Y shape, and all that a little bit more later. Let's get into this episode. Meet Francis, a young boy at the circus with his pops. He's walking around by himself. He comes across a freak show, and the ringmaster guides the boy into the tent. I believe that the circus has made a deal with the entity, and we'll talk about that in another video. We see the Siamese twins, the Stretchy Man, the Dog Boy, an Andy Muschietti cameo, and the Skeleton Man. I call him the Skelly Man. Francis walks into the Skelly Man's corner of the tent and sees what looks like an old man, but I think it's one of its forms. You can see his bones cracking and morphing as the boy walks back there. Old head must have been back there taking a shit because he strikes a match and scares the shit out of young Francis. Francis runs out of there with the quickness and bumps into his dad, who was probably over there at that mermaid attraction. Pops tells Francis that he won him a slingshot and it's time to bounce. So they get in the car and they end up breaking down right by a trio of young natives selling water on the side of the road. I guess the car overheated and Pops gave Francis 3 pennies to buy a 5-cent bottle of water, talking about the circus cleaned him out. He was over there tricking with that damn mermaid. 3 pennies could be a nod to the deadlights and Pennywise, but it doesn't help Francis because he's still 2 pennies short for the water. And at those prices, the water's free. You pretty much just paying a nickel for the bottle. Anyway, the native girl spots the slingshot hanging out the boy's pocket and makes a deal for the water. Long story short, Francis starts visiting the young girl and they develop a friendship. One day while they were running around playing, Francis ran into a part of the woods that all the other native children stayed away from. The girl tries to stop him from running in there, but Francis is in the moment and runs deep into the woods beyond the pasture. Next thing you know, he looks up in the distance and sees Skelly Man from the circus dipping and popping up from behind trees and shit like a tall, creepy Keebler elf. Old head looked like Grandpa Flick from Dr. Sleep. Francis picked up a stick and hid behind a tree, but the old man popped up on him and scared the bullshit out of him anyway. And this part had me rolling because it was the jump scare that you knew was coming. And Francis's face when he saw the man is funny as hell. Also, the way he crawled between the man's legs to get away. And Skelly Man was fucked up off how fast young Francis was moving. I would have jugged his ass in the neck with that stick and then ran. So Francis is running from Skelly Man and he ends up morphing into this shit right here. I mean, bro, if you could just grow some teeth like that on the humbug, then why are you rocking like this? I mean, this many teeth, you could have just put a couple extra joints in the frontal, my guy. Anyway, Francis falls on the ground, and just when you think he's about to get marked out, Old girl with the slingshot bust Skelly Man right in his melon and told Francis to get his ass up and run. And let me point out that the actual blood got on Francis and the rest just floated away. And then after that scene, we jump right into the title credits. So right after the circus and Skelly Man scene, we get to see the inside of Juniper Hill, and Lily is there speaking with the housekeeper who's taken a liking to her. Lily's mom is there to pick her up and talks to the doctor about her medicine. Lily takes chlorpromazine, the first antipsychotic, which is more like a chemical straitjacket. Back in the day, this was the ultimate alchemical transmutation from madness to silence. The funny thing is, Lily doesn't seem like somebody that's even on this type of medication. I mean, she's vibrant, she's aware, and she doesn't seem like she's high or anything. Lily talks with the housekeeper about her involvement in Hank's arrest and how she feels like she let Ronnie down. The housekeeper pretty much tells her to make things right with Ronnie and help prove Hank's innocence. She sounds like she believes Lily about what she saw, but she also sounds like she's seen something herself. The next scene, Police Chief Bowers pays a visit to Hank in lockup, and he asks Hank more about his whereabouts, and he may have caught Hank in a lie. His mother said that they were home watching the Andy Griffith show, but Hank said he was home sleep in the bed. And then you have a witness that placed him on Jackson Street hanging around in the bushes. But Hank still says that he wasn't anywhere near the theater. And we all know that he didn't do what he's being framed for. One thing about it though, Hank is definitely trying to keep something secret. We know that he didn't kill the kids, but Hank was definitely up to something that night. He wasn't in bed sleep, and he wasn't watching the Andy Griffith show with his mom. Whatever it is, Hank is willing to go to Shawshank to keep that shit a secret. Meanwhile, at the high school, tensions are even higher than they were before, now that an arrest has actually been made in the case of those missing kids. But the tension turned vitriol when some hateful students wrote, "Hatchet Hank's gonna fry" on Ronnie's locker with red lipstick. Will and Rich watch as Ronnie tries to wipe the locker clean, but she just ends up getting red lipstick all over her hands. And then she goes into the bathroom to wash it off, and Lily comes right in there with some alcohol from the nurse's office. Ronnie isn't really feeling Lily, but Lily tells her that she's willing to do anything to make it right and free Hank. Lily has a plan to get photographic proof of the entity, but Ronnie scoffs at the idea of getting Pennywise to take a picture.
You actually think this thing is gonna stop and pose for pictures?
But little does Ronnie know, Pennywise will most definitely pose for a picture. Meanwhile, Fuller reports to Shaw about the Bradley gang's car, but Shaw informs him that they're looking for something that was buried 300 years before the automobile was even invented. And that car must have been giving off some sort of energy if Howerin was able to locate it. Fuller then details which part of the feeding cycle the car is from. So the military has deep knowledge about it, and we're learning more about that as we go. Their intel includes sightings of the entity and proof of different forms, which is most likely the same information that Mike Hanlon picked up on during his research in the 2017 and 2019 movies. So Shaw makes a decision to put one in the air and pulls out a box of Philly blunts and instructs Fuller to go grab the zip out the stash. Nah, I'm bullshitting. Shaw makes the decision to put Howerin in the air to advance his psychic reach over whatever they're looking for, so he gets the Philly box out that contains the slingshot from 1908. Meanwhile, Howerin was at the rec tent with some of his buddies drinking and telling more lies. Howerin sitting there telling a story about how he smashed Aretha Franklin, continuing the lore that Howerin loves the brown skin, big breast with the natural afro. Shit, he might be telling the truth like he was about those secret spy missions, but it's still corny to kiss and tell. Anyway, the order to put Howerin in the air made it to the chill spot pretty fast, and Howerin was out of there. By the way, that rec tent is trash, and the homies are asking Howerin to see if he could swing some of those special privileges to get an upgrade. I mean, the water's dripping in this motherfucker. They got the kings and queens drowning on the poker table. So Hanlon and Russo suit up to take Halloran on the air mission. And we could see that Leroy is on board with the general's plans. His buddy Russo still thinks that Masters had something to do with the masked men incident at the base. And Hanlon told Russo that Masters was shipped off to another location, but he didn't clear his name in that crime. Because I think doing that would probably reveal the deeper move at play by the general, and he's kind of keeping that under wraps. You know, that loyalty thing. And this type of loyalty, along with his fearlessness, is why Shaw handpicked him in the first place. I also noticed that Halloran didn't salute Hanlon, and Hanlon didn't seem to have a problem with it like he had a problem with Masters. Anyway, so they take off, and Halloran opens up the cigar box to reveal the slingshot from Francis's past. Halloran sees a flashback of when the slingshot was used to fight it way back when. Anyway, here's a smooth-ass transition shot that reveals Rose as the young native girl from the flashback. And Rose is the keeper of lost things. Remember that. Her antique shop is also where Bill gets his bike back, and it's where Leroy scores that telescope for Will. Items for Will and Bill. Now, after those residual memories from the slingshot fade, Halloran begins to see himself in another place. He's at the lair of Pennywise, and he ends up at that stagecoach and sees the eyes of Pennywise. And I think that it has brought Halloran to see the lair and find out who Halloran is. He probably senses Halloran's abilities. Just as Halloran is able to tap into the residual memories left over from that slingshot, it was able to pick up on Halloran snooping around, and that connection between it and the slingshot is what enabled it to even know that he was there. This is the first time I think we have seen it at a mental disadvantage when he didn't know something. You know what I mean? Because he has to ask Halloran, who are you? That was big for me. I think it kind of speaks to how powerful Halloran actually is. So Halloran starts to see visions of the circus, wars, and tragedies throughout the history of Derry. Then he looks up to gaze upon floating victims of it and the sight of his grandmother warning him to leave. Halloran turns to leave its lair, but his mind is still in its lair, but his body is actually trying to walk out of the aircraft in mid-flight. So Hanlon hops up and saves him, and Russo closes the door. And I'm telling you, Hanlon definitely saved him, because I don't care how bright you can shine. If you fall from that airplane into them trees, your ass is meatloaf. Then we move to a scene with the natives having a meeting about the military digging on the ceremonial lands. The young man who was spying on them comes to sit with his Aunt Rose and tells her about what the military pulled out the ground. They know it's the Bradley gang's caddy, and he wants to make a move before they find out more, but Rose makes him stand down until they know exactly what the military's looking for. She suggests that the group maybe should take a legal approach by sending a cease and desist letter and go from there. That Rose is a smart one. So meanwhile, Rich and Will are at the Derry Grill about to bang some burgers and fries meals, and Ronnie and Lily show up to ask a favor of Will. They need him for his alchemical knowledge about developing film. And we'll talk about that more in his role as well, and the connection to Ronnie and her father. So they step outside and talk to the girls about developing the pictures, and they confide in the boys about what's been going on and what Ronnie and Lily have been seeing. The boys are reluctant to believe them, but not reluctant to help them. And that's a true friend. Like, he said it straight up, like, I don't believe her, but I believe she believes it. And that's enough for him to stand up and help. So that's cool. Then we move on to a scene at the secondhand Rose. Francis pulls up on Rose, and we learn that in his time in Derry as a child, he was there on the military base as well. And he'd forgotten everything about their time when he moved away. I mean, everything about his time with Rose and what happened with it. And that's something that she told him would happen when he was a kid, but he forgot that shit too. And when he arrived in Derry, he started remembering things, but still even forgot Rose's name until he received that cease and desist letter. So Rose is trying to be genuine and find out what they're doing, and Shaw lies right away, talking about some damn irrigation routes, and then in the same breath he tells her that she can trust him. And little does he know, Rose already has intel on what they found, and she knows she can't trust his ass because he's lying about some irrigation routes. So later on that night, Howerin comes over to Major Hanlon's place to have dinner with the Major and his wife. And during dinner, Charlotte tells Howerin about differences her and her husband have about her activism, and Howerin gets the idea that Charlotte doesn't like Derry very much and is not too proud of her husband's accomplishments in the service either. Howerin reveals that he knows about the Major and Charlotte's son, although the Major never told him about Will. So Leroy asks Howerin about what happened up there during that flight, and he explains The Shining to Hanlon, and Leroy admits that he's heard some people having this ability before, but he's never actually seen it himself. He adds that just before Hanlon asked about his son, he felt something in the back of his brain, something that he only felt one other time in his life, and that's when he was attacked in his room. So Leroy had already put together the fact that Howerin was there when he got jumped. Leroy warns Hanlon never to get in his head again, and he assures him that he doesn't have to worry about that. Howerin was able to see that Hanlon isn't able to scare, but he would also love to have somebody like that with him in the trenches, especially someone who's already saved his life. Boom. So the kids have a meeting at Phil and Ted's old hangout, and they talk about how they'll get pictures of it by drawing it out somewhere. Rich says that his uncle was a babalao back in Cuba and that he would conjure spirits, and we're definitely going to talk about the conjuring of spirits. Anyway, they go to a cemetery to perform a ritual and see if they could draw out the entity and get a picture. Rich doesn't really know what he's doing, but he's definitely trying to summon something with the prayer of the dead. They get ready to leave, but it's obvious to the girls that the boys don't really believe them. So the girls get pissed off and ride away and leave the boys there, but by then it's too late. The candles go out on their own, and the boys don't think nothing of it. They just run to their bikes so that they can catch up with the girls. And as they get closer to the cemetery gate, the girls see that the path is stretching away and the exit is moving. Then the ground breaks open like a scene from Stranger Things, and the kids steer off the pathway from the exit. Next thing you know, they're being chased by ghosts. I mean, you got a ghost that looks like Rich's uncle. You got Teddy and Susie there, but no Phil or Maddie. I think it's safe to point out that Teddy and Susie were the only two on the cereal boxes in the grocery store to decay, but Phil and Maddie didn't. And their ghosts don't show up in this scene either. And I know a lot of people think that Phil and Maddie are still alive. I mean, the whole scene looks like something off of Goosebumps, but it's still funny though. Lily snaps a shot of the ghost, but then she loses the camera. Then Ronnie grabs it and loses it, but Rich picks it up only to drop it himself. And then you get it to Will. He's the last one to get it. The alchemist with the knowledge of development. So he picks up the camera, but before he leaves, he looks into a crypt and he gets a snapshot of something. But little bro is definitely brave like his father, because I would have just got on my bike and got the hell up out of there. What are we investigating? So anyway, he gets the picture. The kids make it to the exit. Will follows behind shortly. And then they go break into the school to develop the pictures. And they reveal that they got shots of Teddy, Susie, and a vague image of Pennywise. This episode is just what we needed to push the story forward and give us some insight on what Howerin can do, the children diving headfirst into their investigation about their missing friends, not just to find out, but to free an innocent man. And we learn more about Rose and Francis, also his connection to the town and his military lineage. So much dope esoteric storytelling as well. Let's move right into it. The grand drapery symbolism. This episode starts off at the circus, And the drape symbolism is heavy there, but this isn't the first time we've seen it in the show. In the very first scene of episode 1, we can see the drapes in the theater, and again at the end of that episode. In episode 2, we see Lily walk right past the drapery store and then the film developing spot. Again, the drapes along with the film. And there's also a circus tent with a draped entrance at Phil and Ted's hangout spot. Now we're seeing a full-blown circus with tents and grand drapes everywhere. The grand drape represents the veil, and it's a symbol of hidden wisdom, initiation, and transformation in Masonic and esoteric traditions. It's the barrier between ignorance and enlightenment. And in mystic schools, the veil represents the illusionary nature of material existence. Now, I've spoken a bit about why it chose the Pennywise as its prime form. Even when it turns into a cosmic spider, the ruffled collar and cuffs remain. You could check out my breakdowns about that right here. But shortly put, Pennywise was defeated by the natives, but the natives were conquered by invaders. Pennywise has taken the form of those invaders with the dancing clown. The clown's aesthetic comes directly from a parody of judges, nobility, and Freemasonry, and the clown's costume was a satire of authority. Now, the circus itself adopted that same geometry: the circular ring, the striped tent, checkered patterns, ring masters, and the clown, not to mention the freak shows. The freak show was the main focal point of the flashback scene. And right after the flashback scene, they take us right into Juniper Hill Asylum, and that's for a reason. Carnivals, sideshows, and early mental asylums were all owned by the same people. So-called freaks and mentally ill individuals were often exhibited for profit, especially in Oddfellow-sponsored shows. And on the other hand, these same organizations owned and operated mental institutions. That's right, those circuses and fairs that would put on freak shows and stuff like that were owned by the same people who own mental institutions and asylums. Both Freemasons and the Independent Order of the Oddfellows have a long history of involvement with mental institutions, asylums, and medical care, especially in the 19th and 20th century. They both put themselves out there as providers of benevolent care, and they focused on orphans, the sick, and the mentally ill. In the 18 and 1900s, fraternal organizations built and ran homes which included asylums for the insane and orphanages. These were privately funded, fraternal-run institutions often built on land owned or donated by the lodges, which explains why many of them sit on real estate controlled by these orders today. Both Freemasons and Oddfellows were obsessed with alchemical and symbolic healing. The Oddfellows logo, triple link, stands for friendship, love, and truth, which is their philosophy of total care. These institutions often experimented with quiet rooms, isolation rituals, and ether treatments. They also use shock therapy. All of that echoes that initiation style of sensory deprivation and the reconstruction of the person's identity. They saw themselves as custodians of ancient esoteric knowledge, and that was central to the pursuit of alchemy. When you hear the phrase turning lead into gold, they weren't actually talking about metals. It was a code for transforming the human mind and spirit, transmuting ignorance into enlightenment and chaos into order. By the 19th and 20th century, that symbolic goal took a chemical turn. Lodges began funding orphanages and hospitals and mental institutions, many of which participated in early experimentation with sedatives, tranquilizers, and behavioral drugs. Some of the doctors employed and supported through fraternal orders became the early adopters and developers of psychiatric pharmaceuticals, including chlorpromazine. Chlorpromazine was quickly embraced by the U.S. asylums, many of which were built and operated by Masons and Oddfellow organizations. It was an alchemical way to pacify, subdue, and chemically sever the patients from traumatic or non-compliant behavior. And this totally fit the Masonic goal of dividing and controlling the inner man. Now, both the Freemasons and Oddfellows modeled their structures on ancient Egyptian mystery schools based in Kemet, which is the ancient name for Egypt. The words alchemy and chemical both come from alchemi, an Arabic translation of the Greek chemia, which also is translated to Kemet. Kemet was considered the birthplace of spiritual alchemy, sacred geometry, and the initiatory transformation of the Freemasons. So the Freemasons pretty much absorbed much of this through Hermeticism and the teachings of Thoth and the Egyptian temple rites. So after these Masonic orders modeled their organizations from ancient mystery schools, the transformation rituals simply moved from symbols and chambers and turned into pills and syringes. Now, chlorpromazine is the medication that the doctor prescribed for Lily, and this is what the molecular structure looks like. 3 rings linked, just like the Oddfellows logo. Now, chlorpromazine is part of the phenothiazine class of antipsychotics. The 3 interconnected rings are a tricyclic phenothiazine backbone that includes 2 benzene rings fused with a central thiazine ring that forms a Y shape. Now, I talked about the Y shape in my first IT video and my episode 2 breakdown, and we saw the Y shape in the 1990s miniseries with the slingshot, and they're bringing it back with yet another slingshot. And it looked like she popped him in the head in the exact same place that it in the 1990s miniseries got popped in the head. You got the focus on the suspenders of Francis, that's a Y shape. The transition with the cracks in the ground and the streams were in a Y shape. Even the scar on Hanlon's face is in a Y shape. These details are deliberate nods to the cube or hexahedron found in Metatron's cube, which also makes an appearance in the Muschietti films. Moreover, these deliberate details are core principles of alchemy, which shows up everywhere in this show. We have the alchemy with Hank Grogan, the projectionist and candlestick holder, the guy who smokes embassy gold and controls the silver screen, who has been framed by Pennywise, silver, gold, and copper. The film is first exposed and chemically darkened with silver nitrate, then cast to the screen. That's an alchemical process. You have Will developing the film in chemical baths. There's also an alchemical process. Lily even brings a bottle of alcohol to Ronnie in the bathroom, and making alcohol is an alchemical process. And speaking of alcohol, Howerin brings up moonshine, which is also made through an alchemical process. The children were conjuring spirits, which making moonshine is conjuring spirits. And him being the one to bring up the moonshine is funny with him and his shining ability. The word moonshine dates back to the 1400s, meaning something that's insubstantial or deceptive. By the late 17 and 1800s, it became slang for illicitly distilled liquor. And since illegal distillers work by the night of light, they called it moonshine. The Appalachian South became a stronghold of moonshine culture, and the word's connection to secrecy, nocturnal labor, and the rural rebellion embedded in the South deeply. A beverage that will surely be served at the black spot where the shines hang out. The term shine boy or shine originated in the 19th and early 20th centuries, and it was used as a racial slur directed at black men and boys, especially those who were working as shoe shiners. The phrase comes from the shoe shine profession, where black men and children were often employed to polish shoes for white patrons in public spaces like train stations, hotels, and downtown districts. Poor whites also shined shoes, but they were not called shines. Customers would say, "Hey, shine," to call for service. And over time, the word detached itself from the occupational meaning and became a derogatory nickname implying inferiority and servitude. It's also how other service-based racial insults like boy for black men. Whites often call grown black men boys or shine boy to assert social dominance and reduce the individual's identity to their labor.
You like fireworks, boy? Huh?
Episode 3 also opens up with Shine On Harvest Moon, a song about cycles and illumination during the harvest moon, which is the full moon closest to the fall equinox. This is a time when hidden things are revealed and the crops are gathered. Shine On is both an invocation and a spell for more light, but in the show's context, that song heralds a moment when the buried history of Derry is uncovered. The shine elements are dope how they wove that together. I mean, there's so much to talk about in this episode, but we're going to save some of it for the comments. I mean, I could have touched on the fishnet hammock at the hangout, Richie's uncle in the Babalao. That whole Hank's gonna fry is the same thing that the entity said to Ronnie. So there you have it. A bit of symbolism, history, esoteric gumbo, and a fire recap for the win. And if you like this video and you want to see my channel grow, go ahead and do all that dope YouTube stuff for me and tap that screen a couple of times. And if you're not subbed yet, hopefully this will be the video that'll make you do it. That's all for my video this evening. I'll catch you in the next one.